This meeting is being recorded. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Yang. Yeah. So, hello. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. It's so nice to see everyone. Actually, now is the Spring Festival holiday in China. It's the year of the rabbit. So I think our presenters are already here. So we will start today's session. And first of all, actually, on behalf of IPO China, I would like to wish all of you Happy New Year. This is the year of the rabbit, and we hope that this new year would really bring all of you new possibilities, new horizons, and new joys. And last December, actually, we had a very nice reunion in the first FEC Fellows session. And I would like to thank all the fellows who joined the last session for sharing your wisdom and insights with us. We all know that FEC actually works with its networks and community partners by focusing on three things: dynamic coasts, human development, and coasts, pathways to coastal sustainability. And we apply these three things in 4 hotspots: small islands, urbanization, the Arctic, and river mouth systems. So today's topic is actually one of 3 FEC themes: human development and coasts. And in this session, we're going to hear from 2 presentations. No, you haven't missed out a lot of introductions, Sebastian. I was just saying Happy New Year to all of you. And today we are going to have 2 presentations from FEC Academy and FEC Fellows. And we are going to have a group discussion afterwards in reply to questions like, what's the consequence of business as usual practice at the coasts, and what is sustainable and what are not? And how might human activities shape future, and what are implications to human well-being from coastal change? So without further ado, if I may, I would like to ask everyone to turn on their camera, and we can have a group picture first. Then we will invite our keynote speaker, Dr. Sebastian Fierce, for his presentation. So give me a sign, Yang, when it's done.
Please open your camera.
Yes, please, everyone. That will be our first group photo in 2023.
Sorry. Last shot. Okay, thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Yang. So now I would like to invite our keynote speaker today, Dr. Sebastian Fierce, and he's from Leibniz Center for Tropical Marine Research. And I think most of FEC fellows actually know him because he was the former FEC executive director. And his work addresses the link between biodiversity and ecosystem functioning in coral reefs, as well as human usage of coral reef resources. And he's based in Bremen, and he was the executive director of FEC until January 2022. So without further ado, I would just give the floor to him, and we will know what he would like to tell us about his ongoing research. Thank you.
Thanks, Xiaozhu, and Happy New Year from my side as well. It's good to see everyone, or a lot of you. It's been a while, so nice to be in touch again. Let me figure out the screen sharing. 1 this will take 1 second, and I need to show my slides. Can you see my presentation now? Yes, okay, good. All right, so thanks for the invitation to talk at this fellows session, the first fellows session in 2023. And there's not going to be a whole lot of my current research in this, but just a few thoughts that I had, and I thought it's a good idea at this point to give a little bit of an introduction again into the different themes that Future Earth Coast is addressing, in particular the second theme, human development and the coast. So that's what I prepared for this keynote. So a small perspective on current challenges, but before we get into that, a reminder, this is from our research strategy, from Future Earth Coast research strategy, and we're addressing 3 themes and 4 coastal hotspots, just as a reminder. And the themes are dynamic coast, human development of the coast, and the pathways to coastal sustainability. And in particular, for looking at human development and the coasts, what does this entail? It's meant to enhance an understanding of the impacts, risk, and injustices of current development practices. So what do changes at the coast imply for human capacity and human development potential? But it doesn't stop there. So there's also solutions-oriented dimension to it. So offering alternative approaches and mechanisms for reducing risk, building resilience, and promoting social justice and improved governance systems at different scales. And also sort of a synthesizing impacts of coastal change to understand interactions between vulnerabilities at different scales. And so some of the questions that are being asked, as Xiaozhu has already said, what are the consequences of business as usual practices at the coast? Which of these are sustainable and which ones are not? How can we change these unsustainable practices? And lastly, what are the implications to human well-being from the dynamic coast, from coastal change? And that's including the human dimensions. Potential topics under this theme to address our understanding impacts and risk associated with the business as usual approaches, building resilience of fragile communities, breaking cycles of risk creation at the coast at different scales, advancing societal justice, and also urban-rural transition. So you may remember one of the hotspots are urbanized coasts that Future Earth Coast is working at. Now, the background to this, of course, is some of the current challenges that are facing the world's coastlines, and we see some of the distal drivers in the circle here on the outside. And I think this paper by Jean-Baptiste Jouffret and colleagues on blue acceleration is a very nice overview of the different current challenges that the oceans are facing. So we have climate change, we have population growth, a decline of land-based resources, which means there's an increasing orientation towards the oceans and coasts. We have geopolitics that are affecting how coastal and open ocean resources are being utilized, with changes in consumption patterns and changes in global trade and the distribution of labor and production and technological advances. And this is going into different spheres such as food production, material uses. Sand mining is a big issue in a couple of coastlines, particularly deltas around the world. And we have economic activity such as shipping, conservation, renewable energy development at coastlines. So that's kind of the background against which we are operating at the world's coasts. And to zoom in a little bit on some of these challenges in particular, we have a population growth and urbanization that is magnified at the coastline. So low elevation coastal zones, those areas that are particularly susceptible to sea level rise and flooding events, are a very small land area, even if we're just looking at coastal countries. But they account for a larger share of the population, and importantly, the density of the human population density in these low elevation coastal zones is 5 times that of the global average of population density. And we see also an increase in population that is higher than the global average. So there's a concentration of population growth at the coast. We also have a focus on urbanization at the coast. The majority of the world's megacities, so those cities larger than 10 million inhabitants, are concentrated at the coast. We had a nice book that was coming from FEC or from Loix at that time by Mark Pelling and colleagues. We also have a magnification of environmental change that's addressing the coast, so increasing tropical storm intensity as a result of climate change. One example, or longer and more frequent marine heat waves that are particularly affecting ecosystems like coral reefs, on which more than 500 million people are dependent for their livelihoods. But we also see challenges stemming from governance and economy, the so-called blue acceleration, where we've seen increased economic activity in coastal areas, as introduced by the paper by J.B. Jouffret and colleagues. We have a disruption of global economic frameworks, as we've been painfully reminded over the last few years in the wake of the COVID pandemic and the Ukraine crisis. And we have unclear legal and political frameworks. Two examples of that are the lack of dedicated governance or policy frameworks at the regional level, which is drawing increasing attention in recent years. So, such as the Marine Regions Forum that's trying to address this. So there is a lack of frameworks at the intermediate. So we have global frameworks and we have local management frameworks, but there's very little at the regional level. And the other vast area, of course, which is also of relevance to the coast, are the areas beyond national jurisdiction. So the open ocean and what's happening there. And it's, of course, coastal states and coastal populations that are particularly affected by what's happening there. So that's some of the current challenges. What are some future prospects? So the areas of human development that I argue we should be looking at. One good way of looking at current challenges or developments and perspectives in different parts of the world come from the UN Ocean Decade on ocean research for sustainable development. And for example, for Africa, there has been this effort at mapping out a roadmap, a regional roadmap. For other parts of the world, the Americas, the Pacific, this is still underway, but that's an interesting process to look at because it's a bottom-up, community-driven process where priorities and development directions are being outlined, and that contains issues such as sustainable ocean management, the issue I've mentioned before, how to manage it and govern at different scales, the link between ocean and human health. So that's looking at things like nutritional security or food security with foods from the oceans. There's interesting recent research that's looking at the nutritional quality of different kinds of fisheries and how to manage for nutritional quality and get sort of a nutritional justice in place, making sure that those who are most vulnerable and affected by nutritional insufficiency, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, can get a better share of the nutritionist food that's produced from the ocean. Then we have a trend in a blue economy and the blue carbon potential, which is increasingly on the agenda of governments. So I urge fellows, if they're interested, to look into the implications of this, who's driving the agenda, and is this an equitable and a just development where local communities are benefiting, or is this just another example of a global hegemony of countries in the West or global North that are benefiting from these developments? And we see in many parts of the world, because of the changing natural hazards, that there is also an increased focus on ocean observation systems, forecasting, model development for data poor regions, and particularly how to involve local communities in this. So that's from the Ocean Decade Africa roadmap. There is also some other interesting trends. We do see a lot of emphasis on nature-based solutions, particularly in marine and coastal systems. So work by IUCN and, for example, the German Development Corporation, GIZ, that is funding work in this regard within its Meerwissen initiative. So again, something to consider: what are the implications and role for local coastal communities there? Then coastal and marine restoration is receiving increasing attention. There was a paper headed by Carlos Duarte and together with colleagues published 3 years ago in Nature. This was looking at marine recovery, or rebuilding marine life was the title, and they argued that restoration efforts have to play a very large role. And so again, the question is, what are the implications and what is the role for different coastal communities in this restoration? Who's driving and setting the agenda, and who are the potential winners and losers of these restoration efforts? To me, this calls for an increasing role of co-design in not only research, but also in developing solutions and shaping interventions. So that's an area we're currently working on, both with the GIZ, but also increasingly with the UNESCO. Co-design is featuring strongly in the UN Ocean Decade. And so they're currently developing a training program for coastal stakeholders in co-designing solutions. And another area that I see is important is to develop mechanisms for arriving at more inclusive visions of sustainable coastal futures. So again, who gets to shape these futures, and how are local communities taken on board in accounting for what are their visions of a just and sustainable future. And in a working group that is supported by Future Earth Coast on coastal futures, we're currently in the process of publishing a paper that's reviewing how much these futuring approaches are currently featuring in research, particularly coastal research in the global south, and we're seeing that there is a scarcity in these futuring approaches, and that requires further attention. So that's kind of my view on some of the current challenges and perhaps some areas to look into. And I want to end my presentation with looking at some of the resources and concepts that Future Earth Coasts has developed and is developing that are useful for this. I hope that the majority of you are aware of this, but just in case, to remind everyone, these are the things that we have at our disposal. So the first one is the Circles of Coastal Sustainability Framework that was developed by the previous IPO and team. So Martin Letitia, Alice Newton, Shona Patterson, together with a master student, Natalia de Alencar, who developed this framework for coastal management that's looking at sustainability dimensions, 4 different dimensions, and developing an indicator framework that can be that can include indicators suited to the local context, so they can be locally adapted, but it's providing a framework with 20 different categories of indicators to allow for a comparison. And so after Natalia has developed this, it was first applied in a proof of concept for mainland Spain. So this is just giving you an idea. So it's providing a holistic visual assessment of different sustainability dimensions and the current status or challenges to sustainability. So an easy, intuitive system of scoring. And after this initial development, it has then been applied by a couple of master students from the Wacoma master's program and an ESATEC student, so another master's program, together with different members of the Future Earth Coast Academy in a couple of case studies. So there was an Arctic case study and a couple of river mouth systems, both in urban and rural settings. And this has been conducted or finished over the last 2 years. And so there's a solid basis now to revisit and extend this framework. And I encourage the fellows to see if they would like to become involved in further application of the framework, further development, and rolling it out to different parts of the the coastal regions, because it gives a nice tool to assess in a co-designed way what are current perceived challenges to sustainability and what can be solutions for these. And the second tool that I would like to briefly mention is, of course, our Coastal Futures strategy, which was developed for bringing together coastal stakeholders and develop pathways to a desirable future. So I don't want to go into detail, but just to say that this is a nice template for co-design and for bringing different coastal stakeholders together on a common platform. Again, potentially applying the circles of coastal sustainability to jointly define what are issues, what are future visions where we would like to get, and then to chart frameworks and pathways of achieving these sustainable and desirable coastal futures. And with that, I'd like to thank you and also, of course, acknowledge the students of WACOMA that have been working on the case studies and the members of the FEC Academy that have pushed forward and allowed this further development of the Circles of Coastal Sustainability framework and are involved in rolling it out and developing it further. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sebastian, for this inspiring presentation. And I think like all the fellows, we're quite interested in the slides you presented on current challenges. As you mentioned, that African roadmap was just released. And today we also have some fellows from Africa. Probably later in the discussion session, we can discuss a bit further. And also for circles of coastal sustainability and indeed, we actually aim to extend the framework and basically to roll it out as regional case studies. So this session will be recorded, and if any fellows would like to know more about this framework and would like to carry out a case study in your research region, and please just let us know and feel free to contact us. And I think our FEC fellows are really a dynamic and active network. So we hope that this kind of monthly sessions really would be able to provide a platform for all of you to fund those research and collaboration opportunities. And this kind of discussions could really spark innovative ideas. So next one, we will welcome fellow Mohammed Rahman. And he's from Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research in Germany. So actually today, two speakers are both from Germany. And Mohammed is a transdisciplinary environmental scientist from Bangladesh and working in human dimension of environmental change, especially in low-lying coastal river deltas. So he already shared his screen. Thank you, Mohammed. And please, the floor is yours.
Hello, can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, loud and clear. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. I work at PIK, Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research, but now I'm talking from Bangladesh. I'm here for field work for last few months. So as I discussed, as the presenter, the previous speaker presented, so I will start from there. And I work in Bangladesh. It's one of the largest delta in the world. And this is a very small country in terms of land, but in terms of population, this is one of the 7th largest population worldwide. So so this place is going through a lot of biophysical pressure as well as a lot of human pressure, because on such a small land with large population, and Bangladesh is trying to feed its population through agriculture. It's not a very industrialist country. So it's relatively young country. 50 years ago, it was born. It was part of Indian subcontinent for a long time. It's went through a couple of 100 years of colonial history and so on. So it's relatively new in terms of as a nation, but in terms of its history of land, it's quite old. And three big river, Ganges, Brahmaputra, and Meghna, actually formed this delta. And all these three rivers is bringing tons of sediments. So sediments and water are two key elements which is uh, which connected to the development of Bangladesh. So in this photo, you can see a typical village, how it looks like. So what you can see here, many of the coasts in Bengal Delta are very exposed. You see humans are not living very close to the coastline. And the population density in the coast is quite high compared to Europe or other countries. So the point I want to make, Bangladesh over the last 50 years made quite a good economic success, but at the same time, this success come uh, with a lot of environmental catastrophe. And in the history, many people in the world knew Bangladesh because of its disaster. When there is a disaster, a cyclone, a flood, or something. So in the Western media, that's how they knew Bangladesh. But Bangladesh is coming up with a brand name now in many sector. And if you look at Bangladesh's economy now, it's growing pretty fast. And worldwide, Bangladesh is now well known for its textile industry. It's one of the biggest textile exporter in the world. And also in terms of labor force, if you look at Middle East and other countries, a lot of people are going there for work, and also skilled worker around the world are working. So the remittance is one of the major income, as well as the textile and other small industries. So Bangladesh have around uh, 800 plus rivers, and many of the rivers are transboundary. It's mostly coming from Himalayan glacier melting and so on. So India and there are also rivers coming from China. So this as a lower riparian country, it has also a problem with transboundary water sharing. But we'll be talking about coast. But the reason I'm giving a background is this transboundary water dispute also influence the coastal processes in Bangladesh. So if you look at the degree of coastalness, I would say 1/3 of or 2/3 of Bangladesh have some sort of coastal influence. It's a small country with very large coastline, and we have one of the largest mangrove in the world called Sundarban in the southwest. So the river flow from India and China plays a big role in many coastal processes in Bangladesh, and that's why it's vital. And today I'm presenting an idea of a new manuscript which I have started to write about the transition in the coast of Ganges, Brahmaputra, Meghna. And the reason I become interested to present here, so I know that a lot of other fellows working in different deltas, and they might have going through the similar transition process, and there might be a scope for some sort of collaboration or joint team up for this manuscript. So I have categorized most all the transition I have recorded and listed into 4 categories. There are a lot of biophysical transition, social ecological transition, also going through demographic transition and governance. So I will explain a little bit of each. So the demographic transition, Bangladesh have now a lot of young population. It's going through a demographic dividend, and if you know the demography well, the demographic when a country go through a demographic dividend, it's good for the economy. So a lot of young people for work, It's not like other countries, for example, Japan and many European countries, they have a lot of older population, and younger generation have a pressure to feed the older generation. But in Bangladesh now, the thing is reverse. So a lot of young people are working, so the economy is quite good. But the interesting aspects is from the coast, a lot of people are migrating. When I look at the demographic data in the coastal cities, coastal areas, it's not really increasing. So there are demographic reason. There is also reason which is environmental, because a lot of people are migrating from the coast to inward or outside the country. And so migration is a very big topic in Bangladesh. Uh, and very many coastal process influence this migration. For example, sea level rise, cyclones, salinity intrusion in the coast, floods. There is also transition in livelihood patterns and transition to agricultural pattern and so on and so forth. And all these factors is somehow influencing the demographic feature of coastal population. So this is something I have started to look at for my paper. And the second aspect is the biophysical. So there are a lot of biophysical changes that are going on. Sea level rise is one of the top discussion, and also the sediment starvation. So we used to have plenty of sediment. So today's presentation, I'm not really giving facts and figures. I'm talking as a story. But in my manuscript, I will add a lot of facts and figures and analysis. But as we came from different backgrounds, I thought to keep it as a story rather than a scientific discussion, as for say. So the sea level rise, the sediment starvation, the water flow in the rivers, and all are going through some kind of changes. But one of the change which is alarming to me and which I'll present here is there is a lot of fresh water is turning into saline water. This is becoming saline, and if you know about salinity in the coast, it's very slow. It's going through a creeping process, and it's very silent. The I mean silent. Silent, I mean, is like when there is a flood, it's very visible and everybody talks about it. But when there is salinity intrusion, it's beneath the soil, it goes to going through the aquifers, so it's not really visible. So there is no media attention. Even though if when I looked at the soil salinity data for last since independence of Bangladesh, it's almost 20% to 25% of the land becomes saline. And many of the lands are no more capable of growing some sort of a traditional crops, for example, rice. As you know that as Asian nation, like, we are rice eater and rice is everything to us. So it's silently happening, but it's only we notice when we cannot grow crops. So it takes a lot of time to understand, to going to that stage. And last few years, I was doing research on the impact of salinity. So I looked at health, livelihood, and ecosystem service. And for health, particularly, we have paper where we looked at because a very low-hanging fruit is the hypertension, because hypertension is easy to measure. You just measure the blood pressure, and you see the salt water consumption. Then you try to correlate if the people who drink a lot of salty water and the people who drink a lot of fresh water, what's the differences between among those population, between the population. And we have now quite solid evidence that the people who are exposed to high salinity from food and water are developing hypertension. And I want to mention that hypertension is not a disease actually. It's kind of a phenomenon which triggers to other disease. For example, cardiovascular disease and so on. So we haven't looked at other disease because it's needs biomedical research. But as an ecologist, we looked at like kind of environmental studies to understand how environmental factors are impacting the health. Then also we looked at livelihood in terms of agriculture and so on. We also looked at ecosystem surveys. I'm not going into detail, but I just want to mention that salinity is a bigger crisis in deltas, and I think it's also true for other deltas. Example, in Mekong Delta in Vietnam, it also some sort of problem also in Netherlands and other deltas. But we haven't looked at in detail, like, but we have some indicator, for example, hypertension, but I believe that's just the tip of the iceberg. If you go deeper, there might be other health consequences which we haven't really looked at carefully. Then, as I mentioned, that there is also a shift due to salinity in the coast. Many agricultural land is turning to shrimp cultivation because shrimp is a brackish water crop. So you can grow in brackish water. So people find it quite profitable to move from rice to shrimp. But shrimp also have its sustainability issues, but which I'm not discussing today. But there are lots of paper talking about how unsustainable shrimp cultivation is if you don't do it properly. So in this paper, but it's very old, but still you can see the in terms of land, the rice cultivation is going down, but shrimp plus rice, like that's a mixed cultivation, is quite becoming popular. Um, but this story is not as simple as this because when you move from agriculture, rice cultivation to shrimp, there are other things happens because rice cultivation is very labor intensive. It needs a lot of people to work on, but for shrimp, you don't need so many people to work. It's very capital intensive cultivation. You just need few people, but a lot of money. So the people who historically was working for rice cultivation, the farming class, they become jobless, and many of them are moving out from the village for other job, for example, rickshaw puller in the city. So it changes also the cultural aspects of of a particular area when people move out from the area and go to city, and city is not also a basket for is not heaven. They also have a lot of other problems, and people also suffer when they move to a new city from the village. They don't have skills to cope up with the city context and so on. So that's also a socio-ecological aspect which we should look at carefully. Then this is a governance aspect which I'm becoming very interested. Is Bangladesh historically always have a 5-year plan for its national development. So Bangladesh this time have a 8th 5-year plan. I think 9th 5-year plan will come up. So every 5 year they make up a plan for next 5 years. What's going to happen? What they're going to do. It's kind of a roadmap for next 5 years of countries' economic development and so on. But now Bangladesh have a 100 years plan. And this 100-year plan is called Delta Plan. Together with Dutch colleague, I think it's a collaboration between Netherlands and Bangladesh. They have this 100 years plan. And I think it's not only Bangladesh, there are other countries, Netherlands is helping to develop this kind of long-term plan. I remember from in Vietnam, they have one. Netherlands themselves have a Delta plan, and also Myanmar. I forgot which countries. So they're helping many countries to have build up this kind of long-term plan. But this is hopeful thing. But at the same time, the country who historically have done only 5 years planning and struggle to manage this, and now for this 100-year plan, how easy would be for the country to mobilize resources and implement something which we need to look at very carefully. But I see this is a transition, like short-term planning, short-term thinking. People are moving from short to long-term planning, and which is interesting to me. And in this paper, I really want to go into detail, like what's going to happen if Bangladesh go for 100-year planning. There might be drawbacks, there might be limitations, there might be a struggle to do so. So what are the challenges I would like to look at? Then the last kind of transition I would like to really ask your attention is is a narrative is changing. So if I look at the literature published related to Bangladesh, since the climate change thing we started to talk about in 20-30 years ago, so Bangladesh was explained as a most vulnerable country. It's a risk been measured, vulnerability been measured. There are a lot of discussion about its sufferings and vulnerability. And then like over the time, the new narrative comes. Then people are saying, oh, it's a vulnerable country, but at the same time, it's so resilient. So people are suffering, but at the same time, people are not giving away the hope. Like, you know, they're doing a small initiative and trying to adapt. So the narrative being from vulnerability to a resilient, now it's talking about as an adaptation leader in the world, that it's it's a lot of adaptation examples are here, and we should document it properly and bring it as a good case for the world. And also discussion about like how local and indigenous knowledge and can be incorporated, and how the locally led adaptation can be way forward. So in the literature, I see over the time it's changing. It's no more a vulnerability discussion. It's more about like how to build up a resilient community, because you know we have talked a lot about our sufferings, but now we have to start talking what works and what not, and what to do, where the money will come, and so forth. So there is a shift in the literature. So in last few slides, I described a biophysical aspects, its ecological aspects, and behavior and governance aspects, and the changes in the narratives. So all these things I would like to frame as a transition. So it's moving from one state to another state. Like Bangladesh, in the past, Bangladesh always was talking about a structural solution, like we have to build up new dams, dikes. I think that it has a reason for that, because we always are supported by Dutch colleagues as a consultant, as a donor, and we borrowed a lot of their engineering approach here. And in Coast, we have polders, which is also a Dutch approach. But slowly, people start talking about nature-based solution, even though that debate. I have a paper we published last year where we discussed these two paradigm. People are still skeptic about nature-based solution, and people think it might be nice as an idea, but when it comes to real problem solving, it might not be enough. So you might have to be hybrid nature of nature-based in structural solution. We have to combine. And also, I think there are also vested interest. It's like with whom you are talking to. So if you talk with the structural engineers, they will push their agenda. And if you talk with ecologists or somebody who is a fan of who loves restorations and mangroves and other ecosystem afforestation and so on, so they will go for other things. So it's very conflicting, like who is in power and who want to do what. So I think I will stop here. Uh, so the idea of my paper would be documenting all this transition Bangladesh is going through. But at the end, the message I want to give, that some of these transitions are obvious. It will happen anyway. But how can we make this transition more equitable, more just, because justice should play a bigger role, and transition, who will suffer and who will gain. So some sort of justice aspect I want to bring in this paper. So that's, I presented here my idea, which I'm working on this moment, and I would really love to hear your opinion, thoughts, and if somebody want to bring idea from other delta, I'll be very happy to join force. Thank you very much. I will stop here.
Thank you, Mohammed. It's very insightful, and your way of presenting this storytelling way, it's really, really nice. Sorry, my son is crying. I mean, finishing up a bottle for him is the end of the world. So thank you, Mohammed. And you ended your presentation with some open questions, which really lead us for some in-depth thinking of these transitions you mentioned. And I think you also have been seeking for collaborations on these transitions like biophysical, social, ecological, or demographic and governance in these aspects. So we will open the floor to all the fellows and to start the Q&A session. I think it will be, and anyone who would like to ask questions on these two presentations, please just unmute yourself and ask questions. And turn on your camera if possible. Yeah.
Okay. Can I come in?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Please, Blessing. Yeah.
Yes. That's a very wonderful presentation from Dr. Rahman Mostri, and I want to connect what you just presented to Dr. Sebastian first, because I know he has a lot of papers in these areas of coastal sustainability. So he talks of conflicting interests with regards to implementation, and I know Dr. Sebastian is also hinted that now he has a paper on co-design, or they're working on co-designing sustainable futures. So maybe to cut the story short, I would like Dr. Sebastian first to highlight, because I think that is a very important question of how do we navigate to achieve these sustainable futures. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Blessing. Yeah, that's a broad question, of course, and there is no simple answer to that. I think, if anything, first of all, solutions have to be context relevant, right? So that there cannot be a blueprint that works everywhere, and so it's important to find ways. So the process is important, that are responsive to the local context. And my argument would always be to find inclusive solutions that are not only tailored to the local context, but also developed together with the stakeholders that are affected. And I guess, kind of preaching to the converted here, I guess we can all agree on that, but it's still surprising to see in how many cases we see solutions, proposed solutions or approaches for kind of the natural resource management context that have been developed elsewhere and with little feedback from or relevance to a local context. So we still see these sort of blueprint solutions that development corporations bring to a certain local setting, and oftentimes we also see these paradigms or dominant narratives, as Rahman has said in his presentation, of vulnerability and of need for assistance and so on. And they, oftentimes when you turn this around and you have an engaging process with local stakeholders, you see a different picture emerging, where there are sources, local sources of resilience, of adaptation, sources of strength. And it's important to highlight these and find ways to build on them. Sorry if that's kind of a broad answer, but I still think it's important, because we still see that it's not always mainstream, that there are ways of involving those who are directly affected in developing a solution together. And it's not a new insight. Yeah, we see this from conservation for many years, that if you develop a solution that is excluding local views and local priorities, that these things are backfiring. They're undermined, they're not complied with. If you think of marine protected areas, for example, one of the main reasons for lack of compliance in the same in terrestrial reserves is that things don't work for those who are affected locally. and you have to find solutions that take these local priorities into account. So yeah, I guess that would be sort of my broad answer.
Exactly, Dr. Sebastian, very, very insightful talk. As you clearly mentioned that when I attended COP and the discussion I listened there, and when I go to a very remote village and talk to fishermen, it's completely different story. So that's one of the thing I really want to write in this paper, that is exactly with whom you are talking, then the story is completely different. So the people who want to bring money, they have a different interest, and the people who are really working in the field, and they have no idea what IPCC is, they have no idea what GCF money is, from where it coming from, they have no idea. They're just farmer, but they have a different story. And the people like who work with the international organization, goes for big conferences and talking about Bangladesh, have a very different idea. So that's why sometimes I feel it's not the same Bangladesh. It's the people who is selling it, who is talking about it, is actually determines what Bangladesh is in terms of its vulnerability and its resilience. Yeah.
Just wanted to make one additional point real quick. Where while I'm advocating for looking at the local context and involving local people and giving also responsibility to local actors, we also at the same time have to be a little bit careful to see where this is coming from, because sometimes this is also this approach or this view is also used to divert responsibility. So it can be used to the extreme where it's like, well, these have to be locally led solutions and there are local sources of strength and so on. So people should essentially just come up with their own solutions. And that's, of course, that can be dangerous and should not be used as an excuse for people that are at the root of a problem. When you're thinking of global economic pressures or climate change, there is of course a historic and an ongoing responsibility of countries in the global north as key causes of current inequality that we're seeing, of why people are being marginalized, of climate change, where the main emissions are coming from, and so on. So we have to be careful that this discourse on locally led solutions and on co-design and so on is not used as an excuse for accountability. So for example, funding for a lot of these things has to come from those who are responsible for the current inequality that we're facing. But the solutions and ways on what are priorities, what should be addressed, and so on, those things have to be locally meaningful, and the ways to get there. But it does not mean that all the resources to address and develop these solutions have to come from local sources. So there is a balance there. And one last point that I wanted to make as a comment to Mohammed Rahman's presentation, it's interesting that you see this shift in narrative for Bangladesh from one of vulnerability to one of resilience, because we are also seeing something similar happening in the South Pacific and in small island states, where for a long time there has been this dominant paradigm and narrative on vulnerable, small, sort of helpless populations or countries that require external assistance and solutions, to a narrative that's actually saying there is a source of resilience and a source of solutions as well that we can tap into, and these need support. So again, resources perhaps coming from outside, but looking at locally led solutions and sources of resilience and strength that can be found there. So I do see a similarity in small island states and maybe delta systems in the global south. And so this is connecting some of the dots that we have on our hotspots in future Earth Coast. So that's interesting to see.
All right, thank you for the broad answers. I think I agree with you. Thank you.
Please, Lena. Yeah, just unmute yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the presentation. It's very interesting. I had a more specific question to the Circle of Coastal Sustainability Framework, because as I understand it, it is more an assessment of how different governance processes perform currently. I was wondering how you then make conclusion about or recommendation to improve the current state, because sometimes it's more complex than just increasing the performance of governance processes that are performing very low, because there is more systemic relationships between those different governance processes and how that is taken care of in this framework, or could be even maybe improved.
Yeah, thanks, Lena. That's a good point. Of course, while it's an attempt at an holistic diagnosis of individual factors, it still needs, additional analysis, both to understand what are some systemic challenges, like connecting the dots. So you have a starting point where you're seeing, okay, there are some shortcomings here in this sphere and in that sphere, but then really looking at, okay, what are the underlying drivers of those, or underlying patterns that are causing these things, requires, of course, further analysis. So it's a toolbox that you can use to begin further inquiry, but it's not providing you with complete answers. And so this framework can be taken and developed in different further directions. The question of solution development is also not developed in this framework. Yeah, it's a diagnosis of the current state, and this diagnosis, which of course, like many other things, it's not complete. Yeah? It's attempting to be holistic, and as holistic as possible by going into different spheres of sustainability at the same time, without looking at them trying to avoid to look at them in isolation. So that's the progress that it's providing. But then still, this can only be seen as a starting point. And if you want to look at underlying systemic drivers, then that is something that you can do based on this initial assessment. Or if you want to then develop or start thinking about potential solutions, then it's also something you can use this for, but it also requires further analysis.
Yeah, I agree, because there is this notion of transformative knowledge, so creating knowledge that enables us to get solutions, how to achieve a desirable system state, if that's resilience, if that is coastal sustainability. And I think maybe what I did in my PhD is that I also used the capital approach framework, so mapping governance processes in different capitals, so social capital, environmental capital, financial capital. So that is very similar to what the coastal sustainability framework does, I think. And then using fuzzy cognitive mapping together with stakeholders to see, okay, how are those different processes linked to each other, and what's the connection, and then have this systems perspective to look at very central points in the system and how those can be improved. So that is more of a comment of how maybe this Circle of Coastal Sustainability framework can also be improved, integrating more systems thinking and this forward thinking.
Yeah, that's a great point, Lena. Thanks. So again, I think it's you put starting points in place, but then what you mentioned, this systems approach or systems thinking is quite important to get sort of a more holistic understanding of what are perhaps systemic underlying patterns or causes. But also when you're thinking of transformations, other systemic approaches like a leverage points perspective, for example, where you're looking at where are neuralgic points in the system that where you can leverage change, where you can target interventions to achieve sustainability transformations. That's then needed as an extra. And I think your point on trying to take a systems perspective or a systemic perspective is a very pertinent point to make.
Thank you so much. So, is there anyone who still have questions? If not, we do hope this discussion actually will continue offline. If any of you would like any facilitation from IPO China, please feel free to let us know. And I would like to thank all the fellows who joined us today. And likewise, if you would like to propose any potential projects, collaborations, please feel free to reach out. We are happy to help you. And thank you, Sebastian, to share your insights of FEC themes and hotspots, current challenges at coastal regions. It really extended our understanding of coastal sustainability. And thank you, Mohammed, for your wonderful presentation on these transitions in Bangladesh and all the solutions you presented in your slides. It's really, really interesting. So we really hope this discussion will continue, and we will continue organizing this monthly FEC Fellows session. And look forward to seeing all of you in the next session. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for organizing, and happy year of the rabbit.
Yes.
Thanks.
Bye. See you, Viola. Bye.
Bye-bye. Yeah, you can end the meeting for everyone.
Okay.